Panasonic, in my opinion, has always been a company more than most that has always had this innovation drive. They're always pushing the boundaries of the camera world and industry. And instead of these like slight iterations that other companies do, it seems like each and every major camera release they have is impactful and brings what I consider to be game-changing features. In fact, many of the things that Lumix invented or popularized have become all but expected in many cameras today, and yet sometimes it feels like no one really knows or talks about where these amazing features came from in the first place. And to be honest, a lot of the time it seems to be Panasonic. And quickly before people get mad at me, not everything on this list Panasonic invented, and yes, other camera companies invent really great cameras and popularize these techniques and technology in their own way, but I love Panasonic and I just want to put a little bit of respect on their name. But anyway, let's rewind the clock a little bit and talk about the first innovation, which is IBIS, or in-body image stabilization. The GX7 introduced this in 2013. I believe it was only for photos, but then the G85 and famously the GH5 just kept improving it and introducing it for video. Of course, Olympus developed internal image stabilization right around the same time, and Panasonic was not the very first company to do this, but in my opinion, this was one of the biggest innovations and done the best. In fact, I think Panasonic to this day still has the best internal image stabilization with the GH6, the G9 II, and even the full frame S series cameras, where Canon has a pretty good IBIS and Fuji and Sony have pretty rough IBIS. I think that Panasonic in a big way still stands ahead of the pack for internal image stabilization. The next technology is less impressive, but still very important, which is just fans. Fans on the S1H, fans on the GH6, and the genius new fan in the S5 II series. I mean, just look at the overheating issues with Canon, Sony, and even Fuji cameras over the years, and look at the different levels of success and elegance that they've had trying to implement their own fans. Especially I'm thinking of Fuji with a very smart but very clunky fan system for some of their cameras. And look at how elegant something like the fan in the GH6 or the S5 II is. It's clear that Panasonic pushed camera technology ahead to the point where fans were required for professional work. And just like a lot of things, we see a lot of other companies finally implementing those things to avoid overheating on some of their cameras. But even then, most other cameras just let their cameras overheat and pretend like it's normal. And you're really going to be hard pressed to make any Panasonic camera overheat except for the lower end ones with the highest spec settings. A quick one to throw in here, especially with Panasonic introducing a lot more AI going to be built into their newer cameras, but the infamous DFD technology from back in the day was always machine learning AI trained models. And they still use that technology to a degree, even in their phase detect cameras for that super accurate focus, which DFD is still some of the quickest single point and most accurate single point AF ever made. And with AI becoming more popular across the board and more camera manufacturers using some level of AI to detect different types of subjects like animals and vehicles and things along those lines, Panasonic really was one of the earlier systems to implement AI into their cameras. Back to another big one, which is the dual gain sensor. Now, again, they weren't the very first, but the VariCam Cinema line was one of the first and one of the early super popular cameras with a dual gain sensor technology, which kind of made way for the FX3 and 30 and things like that, with DPs back in the day specifically choosing the VariCam for certain projects and even certain scenes, with lots of shots from Master of None and Better Call Saul taking advantage of that super clean 5000 ISO. They also introduced that technology to the GH5S, where consumer level videographers could take advantage of this really cool technology to bridge the gap between lower budget cameras. And of course, these days, it seems like every camera from almost every manufacturer implements some level of a dual gain system, whether they admit it openly or not. This is just the standard in today's camera marketplace. Next up is lens design. Now, I get a little bored with the full frame lenses for the Lumix system, although they are innovating with that new 100mm macro and a few other things. I think Panasonic with Micro Four Thirds and full frame kind of normalized this wide to normal lens. So in my opinion, what kicked that off was the Leica 10-25 for Micro Four Thirds with a 20 to 50mm equivalent focal range, which is super useful in my opinion. I find it a lot more useful than a 24 to 70 much of the time. And then the kit lens for the S series lenses, that 20 to 60mm kit lens is still one of the most unique kit lenses for any system. And you've seen Sony and a few other manufacturers come out with like a 20 to 70 or things like that, mostly to make up for their horrible focus breathing or, you know, whatever. Point is, I think this trend of wide to normal zoom lenses was implemented first by Panasonic in a big way, and now everybody else is noticing that trend and trying to keep up. Whether they're specifically trying to copy Lumix or not, I'm not going to say that. I don't think that's necessarily true, but still an interesting observation.
Quick last minute one I wanted to add in is just like the idea of touchscreens. The amount of cameras that still have a super poorly implemented touchscreen, or some of these new Canon cameras, the budget ones that don't have a touchscreen at all, is crazy to me, because Panasonic have always had full touchscreen implementation on their cameras, and it just weirds me out that some cameras are not touchscreen even to this day.
Another thing is open gate. Most hybrids have either a full frame 3x2 or a Micro Four Thirds sensor, but until very recently, you had to go either way up to some intense cinema cameras from like Arri Alexa or Red, or way down to the Panasonic Lumix cameras with the GH3, GH4. But this 4x3 or 3x2 or whatever is obviously great and meant originally for anamorphic videos, but so many people are taking advantage of it to crop for social media, either vertically, horizontally, or both, including myself. And you finally see companies like Fuji getting on that trend and letting you record the entire width of the sensor. So again, Panasonic has been doing this since the days of the GH3 or GH4, and other companies are just, in my opinion, finally catching up to that trend. I mean, and there's just so much more. I mean, they had the first 4K mirrorless camera with the GH4 in 2014. One of the first and still one of the most affordable 4K 60 mirrorless cameras with the GH5 in 2017. And I mean, they kind of just invented the first interchangeable mirrorless camera in general with the Micro Four Thirds mount, and the first camera, the G1, releasing in 2008. I mean, they invented the entire marketplace for mirrorless interchangeable cameras and innovated that over and over.
And look at that thing. They had a flippy screen back in 2008. And I like how they have to explain what the camera is in this ad, because no one really knows.
Is just like a digital SLR, only smaller.
It's just insane how many things Panasonic did first. So yeah, I could go on, but I think I've made my point. These innovations that Panasonic has been working on over the years has really shaped the way the camera industry has progressed and evolved, and how they've caught up more or less in the autofocus department now. I think truly nothing is stopping them from continuing to evolve the camera landscape and watching others try and catch up. I really do love how Panasonic always goes out of their way to give us what we need, really before we even know we need it and before we even ask. Personally, I think the dual output sensor from the GH6 and the G9 II are going to be seen a lot in the future for MFT or even APS-C and full frame cameras. Like, imagine a full frame camera with dynamic range boost, right? That, I mean, getting a whole extra stop is getting to pretty crazy levels of dynamic range, even if you may or may not suffer in other categories. Either way though, whether it's the GH7 or the S1H2, S2H, whatever, I'm very excited to see what they come up with next. And that's about it, guys. Thanks for stopping by, thanks for watching, and I'll see you when I see you.